Well, what you do first is stand back from the situation, because often when things are challenging, everybody's stressed. And in a stressful situation, we don't make good decisions. So being able to stand back and start having the conversation with each other about what is the challenge, what's affecting people, what's annoying people, because sometimes it can be that people are getting annoyed unnecessarily because they're seeing something that somebody's doing as a problem to them, but they're not understanding why they're doing it. You need to start observing behaviours, but you also need to start understanding the person, and that may well involve paying attention to what they're saying to you about what they think's going on, and talking to people who know them well. There's a few things that have to be done fundamentally. The first thing is, if the change has been acute, you've got to check out for any delirium that's been caused due to infection or change in medication or some other things that may well be going on. So you'd want to make sure that we've done all those important things about checking for urinary tract infections and all of that. Very commonly, pain is overlooked, so you definitely want to be making sure that, given that in care settings people's pain needs are probably more present than in other situations, that we're looking at those and ruling them out, or making sure we're on top of them. So that holistic care plan is really important.
Do you ever wonder if there's a better way to help me?
We can't have you wandering around the entire facility. You're a danger to yourself and everyone else.
Well, why don't you put yourself in my shoes, find out a little about me, then you'd realise I'm looking for my keys. I'd always have my keys, even when I wasn't driving my taxi.
You don't need your keys now. You're in a care home.
You don't understand. I always have my keys. I need them.
Okay, let's find you some keys. Here you go, Kerry. Well, I have to admit, you seem calmer.
I have my keys. I'm much happier. I don't need to look for them anymore now that you've found them.
I'm glad we found out what you needed.
It's a simple solution. It just takes some patience and understanding. Get to know me.
Well, the whole team need to be part of doing something, and an important part of that is bringing the person and their relatives on board with that. So it's important that we have a time that we sit down together and reflect on all of those notes, possibly again fill in some gaps that we didn't know about, particularly about that person's life story, because again, that can be really a key piece of information that could be missing. I think of a very recent example of a gentleman who everybody was very keen to get this man to sleep at night, but it turns out he'd always worked night shift. So changing the pattern and knowing what's important to him was only came out when we were talking to his wife.
I know some of the residents don't like it when the...
Well, the staff can huddle together. It's a real opportunity to quickly catch up what's happening, how are we getting on with things, but so talking to each other, because things can change. Some new treatments may have been happening, there may have been a review. If we're not keeping up to date, we may well be on the back foot. So those huddles are really important.
Vicky.
Oh no, not again. What's going on? What's this trick?
No trick, Vicky, but I really don't want to be in this awful chair.
But I don't have time to watch you all day.
If you found out why I want to get up, this whole cycle could stop.
So tell me why.
I have awful hip pain, and when I'm stuck in this chair, it makes it so much worse.
That's not in the notes.
Because nobody has bothered to find out. You need to read the signs, because I can't tell you myself.
Okay. Norma, let's get you in bed for a while, and then I'll tell the RN about the pain.
So Agnes was a woman that used to lie in bed at first thing in the morning and shake the bed rail quite loudly. She'd be vocalising, yelling out, and staff would basically ignore it because it was something that she would do every day, and they just sort of assumed it was part of her daily routine. However, what we did is had a look at exactly what was going on. So we actually took a step backwards and just sort of thought, what is her communication needs? What is it that's actually going on? Because quite often when somebody with dementia has behaviours, as they call them, they're actually just an unmet need and they're trying to communicate. So what we actually did is we removed the bed rail and we replaced it with a sensor mat on the floor so that staff would know when Agnes was trying to get out of bed and observed what was going on. approximately half an hour before the vocalisation and things were starting, that she would actually get out of bed, and if the staff then assisted her to the toilet, she'd go. So it was then realised when you looked at her toileting schedules that if you actually helped Agnes go to the toilet half an hour before they actually were, there was no distress, there was no vocalisation, there was no need for a bed rail because we didn't need to try and keep her in bed. We had the sensor mat in place so that if she was, the staff worried about her falling, the staff would know straight away when she was getting up. The noise was because the poor lady was busting to go to the toilet.
Well, the proven strategy is once you've gathered all your information, go through the ABC of getting the information about what's been happening beforehand, before changes are happening, and what people have been doing, is you then should be agreeing as a team what strategies you're going to put in place, and importantly, sticking to that and then evaluating that. Because if you come up with 5 strategies and you're all trying them differently, then you're not going to know which ones are working. So agreeing which ones you're all going to try and sticking to that is important, because otherwise you'll have people saying, oh, well, the person was resistive with that, when actually you hadn't applied all of the things we'd agreed as a team to do.
I'm just trying to do my job.
Then find out what I need.
Okay, what do I need to do?
Check everything. Is there something wrong with me physically? Am I hungry, thirsty or bored, or is there something more?
Okay.
You'll find that I need to go to the toilet more often. Work out when I need to go, and that's one problem solved. I have pain as well. Maybe you could look into that?
Of course.
So you can progressively work out what I need. All the little steps.
I understand.
Because, George, I want to be part of what's going on, and I can't do that if I'm stuck here by myself.
As people develop dementia, their memory goes backwards in time. So they'll lose today, they'll lose the last week, they'll lose the last 10 years and so on, and it continues backwards. And one example I can think of is Shirley. And Shirley was a lady who used to lay in bed quite a lot, and she'd be yelling out, and she'd be very heavily slapping her thigh. And she would slap it repetitively and quite hard. And staff were quite worried that she was going to injure herself because it was so often, it was non-stop, and when staff went in, they couldn't figure out what the actual issue was. So they tried the usual, offering her a drink, offering her food, and as soon as they'd walk out, she'd do it all over again. So we did further investigations into her life story and found out that she used to be a jockey. So we thought, well, how do we connect with her in regards to what we do there? So we ended up getting a brown leather pillow for her, like a cushion, so that she could recognise the smell and the texture, similar to the smell that you get from a saddle. And what happened was that she no longer slapped her leg. She would sometimes slap the leather cushion as if she was riding a horse, but that's what the actual slapping was. It was her reliving her days of jockeying and riding a horse and getting excited with trying to get it across the line. We gave her the cushion. What it did is provide her something to slap with, but it also gave the staff a prompting too to recognise that this was about her remembering her days as a jockey. So the staff could go in there and start talking about her time riding the horses, talk about the weather outside, how it connected to the grass growing for the horses, and really make that connection with this woman who wasn't able to verbally communicate.
The environment can either be a hindrance or a help. We need to look at what it is like for a person to navigate that environment. All of us like to know that we can move freely in a space and that we can have access to outside. So the first thing I would be looking at is, can this person easily get outside? And secondly, whether or not when they get to the door to go outside, whether it's open. So thinking about the common practices, often the night staff quite rightly lock the doors to the outside garden. They may have good reason for that. Sometimes they might want to think about being a bit more flexible on that, but it may not get unlocked in the morning again. So having good routine, that we think about the importance of access to spaces outside, and that we actually don't leave people frustrated with areas where they go to the door and they can't get out through it. So sometimes that is blending in a door that is to an area that a person's not going to be supported to move into, and because then they're going to be told you can't go there. Well, that's rather annoying. So blend those doors into the same colour as the wall may actually help distract that person from going to that door. But equally, you must have an alternative, which is access to comfortable places to sit and hopefully open access to the outside. Well, supporting mobility is key, so you want to make sure that floors are non-slip, not looking too shiny. Carpets often absorb some of that noise that we don't want, and particularly making sure that the person has the right chair to aid, particularly with the aids they may be using. Sometimes you'll find chairs that have too big a depth for somebody who's got shorter legs, so making sure it's the right seating at the right height for that person. One of the things that might surprise people is when we've done research on the level of noises in aged care facilities, they can be sometimes as noisy as building sites. So it's quite reasonable you might want to work noisy radios and TVs, and particularly competing noises. So that can actually be distressing to somebody. Overloading, if we recognise that somebody having too much information, can be distressing. So we can now use apps on our phones to easily just get a sense of how noisy the environment is, and to talk in those huddles as staff about how we're going to manage that. There's no need to have the radio on and the TV on, and to think about the management of that noise. So easy to bring down those levels of distress somebody might be feeling.
So the environment plays a huge part in the person feeling at home. So a resident who's confined in an aged care facility can often feel like they're locked up. By understanding what people's habits were and their routines helps us to give clues as to why that person is actually walking around and trying to get out. So one particular person was Ian, and Ian used to continually walk around the facility, and there was a beautiful courtyard garden within the confines of the facility, and you'd often see him looking out the windows, not necessarily at the door, but just looking out the windows towards the garden. Now, when we went through his history, we actually discovered that Ian used to smoke, and when we spoke to his wife, he was never allowed to smoke inside. So each time he wanted a cigarette, he'd have to go outside in the garden. So we started to encourage Ian to go out in the garden, and he just stopped this pacing because he literally would go out in the garden and you would see him just almost take this deep breath. Even though he wasn't smoking, it was like that was part of what the garden related to him. You know, this great big breath and feeling really good was a really good outcome.
The care plan is a single source of truth. It's the thing that keeps us all up to date with how things are going, how the person is, and particularly the strategies we put in place, whether they're working. So when it comes to that review, that's going to inform it. So it's really important that we're all recording what we're seeing, what we're hearing, and what we're doing. The approach staff should take is a holistic approach of assessing what's going on for that person and understanding them, not the thing that they're saying, not the behaviour that has presented itself. You have to know the person. Fundamentally, you need to know their life story, or else you will have an approach that is about the problem and the stress that's going on. One of the major benefits that might surprise people is it's also time saving, because if you actually start to understand the person, you will spend less time having to redirect somebody because you're actually redirecting against what they want. The most important thing is to assess, plan as a team, work together, support them. What it takes from everybody is commitment and putting the that we're actually going to feel positive about our work, positive about the way that person is being. Reasons we need to do this is how would we want to be treated? Those are the cornerstones of caring for somebody, making sure they're poor, and that at the end of the day we